Hello, everyone. Welcome to Finance Friday on the ARC UK YouTube network. I am Hard Money Jim, as usual, speaking from Jackson Hole, where the cooler August weather is now upon us, and today is a rainy day. Pretty soon, we're going to be seeing occasional snow flurries. Summer here in the Rockies is beautiful, but it is very brief. Well, to get to today's discussion, here's the plan, and it is in two parts. First, I'd like to discuss the recession question that's all over the news. Is the U.S. economy now in a recession? And if we are, how do we know? And why does it matter? Well, that takes some explanation, which we'll get into. And why does it matter? The recession argument, as we'll see, is largely a political argument. And what you need to know is, what's the state of the health or the sickness of the economy that you live and work in? And whether we call current conditions a recession or not, the economic damage being done to the life of the average person today is very visible. So as you'll see, that's what I think is important to us. But anyway, we'll go through all that so that you'll be better informed on the recession question, and then actually better informed than most of the media, who frankly often sound a little bit silly. And in the first part of today's discussion, I'll reveal the meaning of today's title. Is it a recession or a banana? Okay, then after the recession discussion, I have some comments directly related to money creation and its consequences. And I'm going to comment on what I think the Fed is gearing up to do as they raise interest rates and tighten monetary conditions. And again, in preview, I think that the Fed will continue to respond aggressively to the current inflation, just as it has been doing, by employing their traditional tools, that is, increasing short-term interest rates and slowing the growth of the money supply. But in addition to that, I think we should expect the Fed to go beyond its traditional tools, which have been called blunt instruments, and intervene directly into specific areas of the economy, much as they did during the 2020 and 2021 in response to problems caused by the pandemic lockdown. And this little prediction of mine is something I don't see among the pundits and commenters out there, but I do think it's logical and inevitable given the Fed's mission creep of the last 12 years or so, and especially of the last 2 years. And so I'm going to elaborate on that in part 2 of the chat. Okay, so let's get into the first question. Let's see here. Here's a record of quarterly real GDP. And as you can see, there's been a slight decline in each of the last 2 quarters on the right. So the first question is, the one that's been in all the news, is this a recession? It seems like a shouting match has broken out between Republicans and Democrats about whether the US economy is in a recession. And everyone agrees that a recession is a contraction in real economic activity, but there's no real consensus on how deep or how widespread or how long lasting that this contraction has to be in order to get the recession label. So before we get into that debate, we should first have, I think, an informed opinion on what a recession is. So as usual, I'm going to start off with a definition from my trusty old Oxford English Dictionary. And my 2002 edition of the OED says, quote, "A recession is a temporary decline in economic activity or prosperity," unquote. Now that's pretty broad, not too specific. How long is temporary? How deep is a decline? By what measure? Other definitions from the internet include, for example, here's British English. A recession is, quote, "a temporary depression in economic activity or prosperity." Now that's almost identical to the OED. And here's an internet definition in American English, quote, "a period of economic contraction, sometimes limited in scope or duration." And now here's an internet definition from the field of academic finance. Quote, a decline in economic activity that lasts for 2/4 of a year. So now we're getting to put a time frame on it. So, clearly you can argue that we're in a recession or not, depending on your definition of the word. Most Republican pundits say we are in a recession, and of course, they say it's Biden's fault. The GOP, for you who don't know, that's the Republican Party, recently tweeted out, quote, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. This is Joe Biden's recession, unquote. And what are the Republicans' actual arguments to support this assertion that we are in a recession? The Republicans, and even people like Joe Rogan, who is not a Republican, insist that 2/4 of GDP decline is the undisputed definition of a recession. And they point out that most economists, including left-leaning economists like the late Paul Samuelson, define a recession as, using this 2/4 rule. Now, a good writer named Phil Magnus from the American Association of Economic Research, AIER, wrote a column recently in the Wall Street Journal, and he made what I think is perhaps the best technical case for this 2/4 definition. Now, he points out that the Graham-Rudman-Hollings Act of 1985 attempted to rein in the deficit by triggering mandatory limits on federal spending. And in this law, a recession was defined as a period when, quote, real economic growth is projected or estimated to be less than 0 with respect to each of any 2 consecutive quarters. So according to this Graham-Rudman-Hollings legislation, these 2 consecutive quarters may be the closest thing to an official definition of a recession. Now, of course, the Republicans have an obvious political motive to declare a recession. So to the Republicans, it's obvious that we're in a recession. The Democrats are in office. The Democrats caused it. Joe Biden owns it. And if the Democrats deny this, they're denying reality, therefore they're lying. Now, that's the main Republican argument, that we're in a recession. Now, of course, the Democrats push back on this, saying we're not in a recession, at least not yet. And that's not surprising either, because no administration wants a recession declared on their watch. So the Democrats, along with Jay Powell from the Fed and Janet Yellen from Treasury, say the job market is too strong to declare a recession. And in this graph, you can see that employment has fully recovered to its pre-pandemic level. The Democrats and Powell all say, how can you be in a recession when unemployment is historically low, 3.6%? And there are nearly 2 job openings for every application, and payrolls are still growing. Last week, Fed Chairman Jay Powell said, he told reporters, quote, 2.7 million people hired in the first half of the year. It doesn't make sense that the economy would be in a recession. Well, that sounds plausible, but there is possibly an answer to that. And here it is. This data, which is assembled by Bianco Research, shows that during previous recessions, during inflationary periods, payrolls kept growing well into the economic downturn. So you can see the gray boxes are recessions. The yellow boxes are payroll growth. And you can see that payroll was growing well into the recession. The reason for this is that jobs are a lagging indicator of economic activity. And if you think about the process, say you're an employer and things are looking good. So you set the hiring process in motion, and it takes months, maybe sometimes years, to gear up hiring and training until you actually see people added to the employment roles. But in the meantime, after this, your hiring process is underway, but before the new workers actually show up for work, the economy gets weaker. So payrolls can be increasing even while the economy is getting more poor, especially when prices are rising rapidly. But now the Democrats have another reason, and I think a better reason, to justify saying that we are not in a recession. They appeal to the most widely respected authority on U.S. recessions, which is the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER. So what's the NBER? Maybe you haven't heard of it. The NBER is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does high-quality investigation and analysis of economic issues. It's financed by donations from government agencies, private foundations, and individuals. It was founded in 1920 by private businessmen and economists. It's headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's got a network of nearly 1,700 economists who hold primary appointments at North American colleges and universities. NBER members have won 38 Nobel Prizes. So NBER is widely known as nonpartisan, and as far as I know, this is true. Part of its charter is to never make policy prescriptions, only to do research. So they write papers, they measure economic progress and prosperity, they hold conferences, and I think it's a politically neutral think tank for economists. Not to say that its research doesn't have political implications, but the point is that NBER itself deliberately avoids political discussion. So anyway, what does NBER have to do with recessions? Well, they have a business cycle dating committee that dates highs and lows in business cycles using a variety of economic variables. Their data is all backward looking, so they typically do not declare a, quote, recession is underway until all the revised data is in, which is typically 6 months or more after a cyclical peak. A recession, to the cycle dating committee at NBER, starts when economic indicators peak and the recession ends when those indicators bottom out. So here is a graph of recession as defined by NBER. This is from the July 29th Financial Times, and you can see the recessions in yellow. Now, here's the definition of recession from the NBER's website. Quote, the NBER's traditional definition of a recession is that it is a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and that lasts more than a few months. The committee's view is that while each of these criteria, the three criteria, depth, diffusion, and duration, needs to be met individually to some degree, extreme conditions revealed by one criterion may partially offset weaker indications from another. For example, in the case of the February 2020 peak in economic activity, we concluded that the subsequent drop in activity had been so great and so widely diffused throughout the economy that the downturn should be classified as a recession, even if it proved to be quite brief. The committee subsequently determined that the trough occurred 2 months after the peak in April 2020. So you look at this graph here, see the big decline there on the right in blue, and then the big upturn. This was a recession as defined by the National Bureau of Economic Research, but it was only 2 months long, not 2 quarters long. So by their standards, so much for the two-quarter rule. So, according to this widely respected authority, right now we may or may not be in a recession, but we don't know because they've not declared it yet. And by this standard, the Democrats are correct. And you can see here that there have been at least 2 exceptions to this two-quarter rule. One was in 1947 when we had 2 consecutive quarterly declines in GDP, but no recession was declared. And the other was, like I just said, in 2020, when they declared a recession, even though the downturn did not last 2 quarters. So here is what the usually left-leaning Bloomberg News says. They say there's no recession until an obscure panel of eggheads say so, and they're talking about the NBER. So, the Democrats have a plausible case that it's premature to declare a recession. And of course, they, like the Republicans, have a strong political motive to take this position. Why would Joe Biden want to admit that we're in a recession? I mean, in addition to not wanting to look bad, he may think that declaring a recession will change people's economic habits, making the recession sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, Jay Powell has a more nuanced political reason. Now, he is raising interest rates and allegedly reducing the Fed balance sheet to reduce demand, but he wants to avoid recession if possible, because if we're in a recession, then there's going to be lots of pressure on him to loosen policy again, causing more inflation. So if he admits to a recession, he could be accused of intentionally inflicting additional pain on the American people by continuing these harsh policies. So denying there's a recession helps keep his rate raising program intact. So those are the arguments from the right and from the left. Are we in a recession, a significant downturn that will be recognized by NBER and everyone else months from now? I think this economic downturn so far is like a couple in a broken relationship. We're pretty sure the happy times are over, but the divorce is not final, and officially they're still married. But we all think it's over. Regardless of your opinion on this, the debate is really pointless. And to make the point that the debate is pointless, I want to recall a humorous similar debate from the last big inflationary period we had 44 years ago in 1978. And here I'll explain the banana. So this is Alfred Kahn. He was a prominent economist in the 1970s. As head of the Civil Aeronautics Board, he was instrumental in deregulating the airline industry. And his actions even had a personal effect on me. Because after graduate school in 1978, I worked for a regional airline in Atlanta, Georgia, both as a pilot and in a management position. As a result of Kahn's deregulation influence, our airline was bought out by a bigger airline, and I lost my job as the assistant VP of flight operations. As it happened, I was still flying the line as an airline pilot, but that wasn't so interesting to me. So I re-entered the Air Force and resumed a military flying career then. But anyway, Alfred Kahn was responsible for this creative destruction that cost me a management job in the airline industry. And of course, now I'm glad that happened, as it was a great boon to the industry and to the flying public, because great companies like Southwest Airlines and People's Express came into existence because of Kahn's deregulation. Well, anyway, Kahn was head of Jimmy Carter's anti-inflation program in 1978. He was the so-called inflation czar. And one time when testifying before Congress, Kahn said that failure to get the soaring prices under control would lead to a deep, deep depression, quote unquote. And the Carter administration, when he said that, freaked out, and they did the same thing the Biden administration is doing now, denying that we're in a recession. So Carter and his aides, worried all about the political fallout from these comments, instructed Kahn never to say the words depression or recession again. So Kahn, who had a great sense of humor, was later talking to reporters, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing in here, recession has become a bad word. So I, Alfred Kahn, I'm going to call it a banana. The question is whether we have a banana or don't have a banana. I think we're having a banana. Other people don't think we're having a banana. And then, according to some accounts, a major banana producer objected that these comments cast a bad light on the banana product, on bananas. So Kahn changed his code word from banana to kumquat. We're having a kumquat. So what I'm arguing is none of this recession debate is new. It's kind of a tradition of American politics that no president can ever acknowledge, a chance of a recession. They think it's going to panic people and become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And no president wants to be blamed for a failing economy. which he will be if the recession happens on his watch, even if it's not entirely his fault. And that's certainly the case with Joe Biden. He gets some of the blame for the current inflationary boom and deflationary bust, but not all the blame. So, recession is like the word in Harry Potter that cannot be spoken. Administration officials are permitted to talk about, slow growth or transition to a slower economy. But then, as now, you cannot use the R word. So, I agree with Alfred Kahn. I don't think we're having a recession. I think we're having a banana or a kumquat, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Because whether we find 6 months from now, when the NBER officially dates this economic cycle, that we're in a recession or a depression or a banana or a kumquat, what we call this downturn and the exact meaning of it and timing of it, the exact timing of it, I should say, will not matter to most of us. What will matter, though, is the loss of prosperity that comes with an economic downturn. And that lost prosperity is becoming quite evident. Here is a chart of real disposable income. This is personal income adjusted by the consumer price index. Look at the deep, narrow spike on the far right. It's very deep and it appears unprecedented. Now, to quote Jeffrey Tucker in the Epoch Times on August 4th, quote, "The data on real disposable income tells the real story. People don't need to wait for GDP figures. They know exactly what is going on because they feel it in their falling standard of living. Real after-tax income is down this year alone by 8.3% annualized. Month by month since April 2021, we've been in the longest period of decline in real disposable income since World War II. The value of the dollar is down 14% from 18 months ago, but in some areas, the pain is much more intense. Energy prices are up 41%, groceries up 12.2%. Now, real hourly wages tell a very similar story. In this graph, CBS News reports that more Americans are taking second jobs in order to deal with inflation. Quote, "More Americans than ever before hold 2 full-time jobs, amounting to more than 70 hours of work per week. In June, 426,000 people were working 2 full-time positions, compared to 308,000 in February 2020, according to federal labor data. Now, relatedly, I personally know people in their 70s on fully funded retirement pensions that are going back to work, and they're having to take jobs because their pensions are not keeping up with consumer prices. Switch now to the UK. UK consumer confidence has dropped to a record low, and here's more evidence of pain. This time it's just in the UK. These are similar numbers that we see from other countries. So recession or not, as Adam Smith used to say, there's a lot of ruin in the nation. And so now hopefully you have the information on recessions to win a bet. Either way, you could argue for or against a recession at the pub tonight. You probably know enough to win. Okay, so let us take a break right there and ask if there's any questions or chat comments.
We have a super chat from Mary Ellen. Thank you for $4. We have also a super chat from Duan Knight. Thank you for $5. And another super chat from Mary Ellen. Thank you. No questions though. Okay, great. And thank you to Mary Ellen and to Dwayne. I appreciate your support, as does ARC. So now let's move on to part 2 of this discussion. And here I want to discuss what I think the Fed is up to, with, as I said, a little twist of
something new, I think. I think we can all agree that the economy is not really healthy, and we know that the Fed is inflicting damage by raising interest rates, and we know that they're planning to slow down the growth of the money stock and raise interest rates in order to reduce demand. But unlike others who comment, others who have an opinion on this issue, I think the Fed's going to stay aggressive and keep hiking rates for many months more. And history of rate hikes shown here supports that view. CPI inflation now is over 9%, and the Fed funds rate is at 2.5%. During previous rate increase cycles, the Fed has never stopped raising rates until the federal funds rate exceeds the CPI. Now, to achieve that relationship in this cycle, the Fed funds rate has to increase a lot, or the CPI has to decrease a lot, or both. And these numbers indicate that the Fed still has a lot of rate hiking to do. However, much of Wall Street, a lot of people on Wall Street don't agree with that assessment, because apparently they think that CPI inflation is going to come down very soon and pretty fast. And here's an updated display of a graph I've shown before. Here is what most Wall Street economists think. This is an updated chart of a monthly survey of 70 Wall Street economists. And on average, when they're asked, they always think the current CPI inflation is the peak inflation rate, and it's going right back to 2% within a year or two. And they repeat this belief, month after month, no matter how high the CPI rises. So it looks like the inflation is transitory sentiment is still very much alive and well among Wall Street economists. So many on Wall Street are predicting that CPI inflation will come back down to 2% quick, and therefore the Fed will not have to raise its rates too much in order for the Fed funds rate to exceed the CPI. Now, to me, if the Fed does back off from their current aggressive response, it's not going to be because CPI inflation goes back to 2% quickly. More likely, it would be because the Fed's policies are, quote, breaking things in the economy. That is, they're causing so much pain that the Fed gives up on its rate hike program and learns to live with higher inflation. And this prospect of breaking things is another reason that some pundits and traders think the Fed's going to back off its rate hikes in the near future. Their thinking is that the Fed is going to sink the economy and cause so much pain that they won't have the courage to keep suppressing the economy with higher rates just because they're fighting inflation. Okay, so, but as I have said before, I think the Fed is committed to continuing to suppress demand. First, because of the political pressure that comes with higher consumer prices. And second, because the Fed needs to salvage its reputation. The Fed's been surprised, it's been wrong, and it has failed in its main task of ensuring stable prices. So the Fed's embarrassed and has a lot of work to do to get prices, price increases down in order to restore its professional reputation. If it does not do this, the Fed's going to be subject to congressional oversight, and that could cause a lot of heads to roll. Now, there is an additional reason I think the Fed is confident or steadfast, I guess, in its aggressive tightening mode. And that's the fact that the Fed has acquired a new box of tools during the pandemic. And I think they're eager to use these tools if the occasion permits. And so that is my little twist on what I think the Fed's going to do. So the Fed's traditional tools have been called blunt instruments. Traditionally, The Fed can raise or lower interest rates or alter the money supply, but they cannot be very selective. For example, they can encourage banks to lend, but it's the banks who decide who gets the loans and who gets the new money. Until QE, the Fed was only on rare occasions directing new money to specific entities or economic sectors. Many economists and politicians complain about this, saying that the Fed needs sharper, more selective tools. But the Fed's tools actually started getting sharper, starting with QE in 2010. Under QE, the Fed directed new money to anyone who owned assets like stocks or real estate. Maybe it wasn't their express intention to make the rich richer, but that is what they did. QE was designed to cause a wealth effect that trickled down to everybody in the economy. And of course, that trickle down did not happen. So QE was still, in their eyes, a very blunt tool. So the sentiment is now growing that the Fed needs sharper tools or better tools in order to get new money to those who, quote, really need it. During the pandemic, the Fed used a mix of the old and new tools. They used the old new tool of QE, doubling down on their asset purchases and sending stock prices and house prices to these astonishing new highs that we've seen. But the Fed also acquired other more precise lending and asset purchase tools through the CARES Act in 2020 and the American Rescue Act in 2021. Since the beginning of the pandemic lockdown, Congress has spent about $6 trillion, that's with a T, dollars on numerous free money programs for households and businesses. And those include stimulus payments, enhanced unemployment benefits, refundable child credits, forgivable paycheck protection program loans. And all that money showed up in bank accounts as M2 that was created by the Fed or the banks, but mostly by the Fed. So the Fed and the banks created the money, and Congress helped target it to where they wanted it. The basic mechanism of action in all these new tools is always the same. The Fed creates money through asset purchases or direct lending that is distributed to people or corporations. The new post-pandemic distinction is that the new money is increasingly targeted to specific industries or municipal governments or public utilities and so forth, where the Fed and the Congress think that money is going to do the most good, where it's most needed. For example, in 2020, you may not be aware of this, in 2020, during the financial panic that accompanied the pandemic lockdowns, the Fed purchased New York City subway debt, the municipal debt of the state of Illinois, bonds from IBM, Apple, and AT&T, and high-yield exchange-traded funds, just to name a few. The list is much longer than that. The list is like a page long. So, don't be confused by the alphabet soup of acronyms that describes these pandemic era programs involving Congress and the Fed. If you go to the Fed website, you'll see there PPP, MSLP, MSELF, NONLF. The list is very long. These new lending tools target specific groups, but they all work on the familiar principle of made up money caused by a keystroke. The central bank never runs out of money. Now, this concept is not hard to understand. If you ever get confused about it, just remember the instructions from the game of Monopoly that we all grew up with. I'm going to read them. Quote, what if the bank runs out of money? Some players think the bank is bankrupt if it runs out of money. The bank never goes bankrupt. To continue playing, use slips of paper to keep track of each player's banking transactions until the bank has enough paper money to operate again. The banker may also issue, quote, new money on slips of ordinary paper. Now, every time my lovely wife mentions the soaring prices of real estate, in our neighborhood, I just reply, it's all monopoly money. And I hope you can, see why I say that. So, simple as this money creation concept is, this process is still not well understood by politicians who supervise the Fed. It was well understood at the Fed's founding, but the Fed's founding, the Fed was founded with strict limits on what the Fed could do to create money. That has all changed in the last 12 years. And I am saying, I think the Fed will continue to evolve into an even more activist money creator in the coming years. As Jim Grant of Grant's Interest Rate Observer likes to say, radical monetary policy begets radical monetary policy. Now, I want to recommend a book that I recently finished that describes this recent rapid growth in the Federal Reserve Bank's power. The Fed Unbound by Lev Menand, Levmenand, is a short but very illuminating read that details how the Fed's mission has expanded radically over the last 12 to 14 years, especially since the pandemic. Now, Menand is a professor of law at Columbia University, and he understands the legal and historical roots of the US banking system as well as anyone. And he understands modern money creation very well. He also has some good insights on the so-called shadow banks that create financial instruments that sometimes function as money or near money. And he thereby, I think, adds an extra dimension to the money creation, to the discussion of the money creation problem. Menand is also worth following because I expect he will increasingly become a thought leader in monetary policy, and there are not many of those. So his book is short, takes only about 4 hours to read, and it's well worth your time. So anyway, to get back to my scenario, I expect the Fed is going to stay aggressive with its blunt tools by raising short-term interest rates and slowing money supply growth. And, that's what everyone's talking about. The objective of these actions is going to be to put a lid on demand, that is to suppress aggregate spending, thus reducing the rate of consumer price increases. But the painful side effect of that action is going to be that some companies, industries, public utilities, pension funds, or government agencies and so forth are going to suffer major losses. And that is where I think this recession is going to be different. I think this time the Fed is going to use its new tools to step in and prop up specific, certain failing entities, even as the economy in general is sinking. So for an example, in a severe recession, which will be exacerbated by the Fed's aggressive action, do you think the government would allow American Airlines to go bankrupt? Well, no, they would not, just for national security reasons alone. And they will use their money creating power and or the banking system to accomplish their goal. Do you think they'll allow the Illinois or California pension systems to stop paying benefits because of impaired asset values? Or would they let a major public utility, go under if its customers were in danger of freezing? So, you get the idea. They'll let the economy in general deflate, but they'll also try to prevent strategically important, in their view, companies or industries from failing. So just as they bailed out financial companies in 2008, they're now, I think, going to step into the industrial economy in 2022 and 2023, wherever they see severe distress, and they're going to do, quote, whatever it takes, unquote, because they are increasingly confident, or maybe desperate, but they're increasingly confident in their ability to fix broken parts of the economy. And further, I think the Fed will be encouraged by the Congress to do this. Just like the Congress and the Treasury and the Fed all collaborated together during the pandemic lockdown recession, they're going to continue to do so during the next bad recession. So in a nutshell, I think they're just going to suppress the economy as a whole. Then when they break something, they're going to ride to the rescue selectively to patch up the broken spot. I guess they're going to be both arsonist and fireman. Now, I'm giving my own name to this potential policy. It's a nice name the Fed could get away with using. I'm calling it targeted reflation. When the Fed raises rates and stops growing the money supply, the economy starts to deflate. I imagine the deflating economy as a big deflating balloon. And on the surface of the balloon are holes that represent various, strategic businesses and industries and local governments that the Fed does not want to fail. So they will selectively reflate those little critical holes in the balloon to prevent the air from exiting the balloon too quickly, and just thus save those critical companies or industries from financial destruction. Now, these kinds of bailouts are becoming increasingly popular because they can be done with very little impact on on taxes or the official budget. So this is important. These monetary bailouts can be funded entirely or mostly with newly created money in the form of bank loans guaranteed by Congress, direct loans from the Fed, or QE type asset purchases of private bonds. No new taxes have to be imposed. So these policies, I think, will be embraced by all politicians, both on the left and right. Some will understand what's happening, and some will not. But not to be too cynical, but the politicians who do understand this system are going to hope that their voters do not understand what's happening. Targeted money creation is blatantly unfair, and it can succeed, in my opinion, only if voters do not understand what's happening. So, of course, the Fed and the Congress are going to allow these non-critical companies and industries to fend for themselves, and those might include these guys won't get any help, and that might include fossil fuel companies, gambling and entertainment companies, service and recreational companies, some of the zombie companies I've talked about before, and so forth. On the other hand, businesses related to green energy, affordable housing, and woke city governments, I expect they will get lots of help in the form of guaranteed loans or other financial support of their debt. All right, so I'm calling this program, which I think we'll see because we've already seen it in 2020 and 2021, targeted reflation. That's a nice name, but maybe it might better be called by a more realistic or descriptive name, and that is monetary central planning, or maybe even monetary fascism, because these programs use money creation to pick economic winners and losers and influence economic decisions that should always have been made by private market forces. All right, so that's my latest little theory. I hope you enjoyed hearing it. That is, how are we doing on time? That's a pretty good wrap for the day. I hope I didn't go too fast. Do we have any questions or discussion? We have a little more time than normal today, which surprises me. I thought this was going to take a long time.
We have a couple of questions. So
yeah.
Thank you, Enric, for $5. He's asking, is Wall Street predicting a short inflation because they are used to a long bull market?
Yeah, is Wall Street predicting a short inflation because they're predicting a long bull market? I would say that's close. I think they're predicting a short inflation because they have a lot of confidence in the Fed. You think about it, I'm an old dog. I can remember the days of Alfred Kahn and inflation. 95 at least percent of the guys and women who work on Wall Street, they've only been there 20 years. They have never seen a big inflation. They have never seen a big economic downturn. They've never seen a big consumer price inflation. Never seen the kind of economic malaise that we had in the 70s. Now, they've seen the financial crash, But look what they saw. They saw the Fed ride to the rescue and inject tons of money, revive asset values, and inflation and consumer inflation stayed low for those years. So I think what they're thinking is they're looking for a repeat of that. They think we're going back to 2019. They think we can have rapid growth of financial assets and slow inflation because that's what they grew up with. They think that this inflation that we're seeing comes solely or almost solely from things like, Putin's gas price hike, from wars, from supply chain disruptions, from the disruptions of the pandemic. And, good theory will tell you that can't be true. So to answer your question, I think they just have overconfidence. The reason they're bullish is they have overconfidence in the Fed. And I think that is what those lines on the economists' predictions indicate.
We have one more question from a friend of Aristotle. He's asking, what about Powell's comment about data-driven action? Was it a signal to politicians to back off and not apply political pressure for lower rates?
I haven't thought of it that way. What he was signaling was what he was trying to say was that the third pillar of his monetary policy, which is forward guidance, which I characterized in one of these broadcasts as leaking to Nick Timiraeus of the Wall Street Journal. The Fed was using this forward guidance to try to telegraph to the world what they're going to do. And what they found was it didn't help. They telegraphed forward guidance, and by the time they got to a point to do something, everything had changed. So rather than look stupid by saying, well, you didn't live up to your forward guidance, or your forward guidance changed, so what's the point of your forward guidance changed 3 months after you gave it, so what's the point of your forward guidance? And that's happened repeatedly. I think they just said, we're not going to give forward guidance. And this is my interpretation. And we're just going to, quote, go by the data. We're objective. We're going by the data. That's going to be their story. Now, ironically, having said that, Jay Powell has continued to speak to the press like 4 times since he said no more forward guidance. But no, I think that's what they were after. Now, he's not going to stop the politicians from carping. And I don't think he expects them to. So I think he was just trying to not embarrass himself by giving forward guidance that he can't live up to.
We have a super chat from Mary Aline. Thank you so much. We have a super chat from Jeff Bannister. Thank you. Another one from Mary Aline and another one from Mary Aline. And we have 2 comments, one from Bonnie, who has been a member for 3 months. She says, does anybody think about stopping this?
Does anybody think about stopping this? Meaning stopping what? I'm not sure I understand the question.
A recession, I'm assuming.
You mean prevent us from going into a recession? The calculation is on the part of the Fed that the recession, Jay Powell at least, the recession is better than the inflation. Because the recession involves job losses, and that affects, maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of the people. If you go from 3.5% to 6.5% unemployment, but inflation affects everyone. So your question is an interesting one because it implies to me a very false framing of the issue. The way contemporary economics sees the question is, it's a trade-off between prosperity and inflation. And we have to have a little bit of inflation, but not too much. And if we get too much, we have to bring it down. But then that causes, lack of prosperity. And if we overact, even poverty. And this is not the way the economies work. But this is the way, the 500 PhDs at the Fed have interpreted it. Now, it may sound like I'm saying they're stupid. I am not. I am saying they are very smart, but they have a bad roadmap. And so, they're going to be directionless. And what needs to happen is we need to reframe the debate to let people know that prosperity depends on free market determination of all prices, including interest rates, which is the universal price. When you think of it, interest rate prices affect everyone, and that that prosperity and human well-being requires free, or at least freer, markets, and especially freer financial markets. We won't get out of this debate, this recession versus inflation debate, anytime soon. I suspect, I don't fear anything anymore about the economy, because economies seem to plod along no matter who's trying to wreck them. But this framework and this debate isn't going to change until we have, I think, some fairly severe consequences. And then we'll have a new monetary order that I hope will be better. Could be worse, but better. So, but given the people in charge, no, nobody thinks that nobody's got a way to. Nobody is saying let's avoid recession by letting things work out slowly, letting the monetary aggregates grow with good bank loans, and allow interest rates to go up, to go down, to find their own level, allow companies to go bankrupt and be recapitalized naturally. To me, that is the solution. That has always been the solution. That would take a long time, probably 3 to 5 years, to really work out the problems in the economy and come out on the other side as very prosperous. We'd also need more deregulation and freedom to produce energy and freedom to produce various commodities, open mines back up in the USA, various things that we desperately need to do to ensure supply of all kinds of commodities and all kinds of manufactured goods comes up to meet the demand caused by this big monetary inflation. We need all that, but that's not the way this recession and prosperity problem is being framed. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. I hope it changes in my lifetime. That's a long answer to a simple question. Sorry.
And we have a comment from Jeff Manister, who has been a member for 4 months. Thank you so much. He says, thanks for keeping us aware, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy it very much. And I hope you'll, every now and then when you can, pick up some of these recommended readings. I really feel that we need to educate intelligent, interested people so they can become better voters and ultimately better investors and more defensive for their own well-being. Okay, well, thank you very much.
We still have a couple
I'm
more.
sorry.
Just
okay, yeah.
Two super chats from Mary Ellen. She says they're robbing all of us, and Janet Yellen is Dolores Umbridge.
Oh, couldn't say it better myself, Marilyn.
And last super chat from Bonnie. She's specifying, does anyone speak against federal control of the economy? That's what she meant.
Well, other than us, you have a few politicians who speak on the margins. Relatively few. There's a few Southern Republicans, and Rand Paul comes to mind. He'd like to audit the Fed, so would I. But they are few and far between. For the most part, they are complicit in this manipulation of money. It's too convenient for them. They need to be educated too. And in later Substacks and discussions, I'm going to get into some data I've seen into how few of our politicians actually understand the money creation process. I think to restore sound money, you have to start with sound understanding. And they really, surprisingly, shockingly, they don't have it. Very few have it. I'm not sure what their exact model is if they have one. It's a little discouraging, but if we know ignorance is the problem, that's something we can work on.
And that's all. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Fun discussion for me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. So take care, all.